All right, we are back. 1 o'clock hour, the Connor Happer Show. You're on 1620 The Zone and on 1620thezone.com. Connor Happer, Josh Hodson with you. We're joined now on the Prairie Flower Casino Zone hotline by our good friend. It's been a while. Max Olson, now of ESPN, joins us. Max, good to hear from you. What's going on?
Hey, we're staying busy, man. A lot of firing, a lot of action. Just trying to keep up.
There is a lot of firing going on, and there's a lot of weird teams in the top 10. There's a lot. You're going to be really busy with the transfer portal coming up this offseason. I mean, this is going to be nuts.
Yeah, I think we're kind of setting up for an all-timer here, and I think it felt that way. Gosh, probably felt that way at the end of probably was it 22, I think, when you had a lot of big jobs open up. But yeah, it's just that whole collision of playoff coaching changes. Technically they moved the portal to January, but really all that stuff's just going to be kind of happening behind the scenes in December.
Yep.
Yeah, buckle up. Next 6-8 weeks here are going to get nutty.
So this coaching carousel, and there's LSU and Penn State are open. There's going to be a bunch of other jobs that are open, and it's fascinating that they're open early for a variety of different reasons. Maybe not so much for like who are you going to get, but what led to them making the change this early. What is there a connecting thread specifically with those two, Penn State and LSU, that led to them making decisions as quickly as they seem to make them?
I mean, I think that at both places, at LSU and Penn State, you're talking about programs that were, seriously shoving their chips all in for 2025. Obviously, Penn State, you had so many players coming back. You add Jim Knowles, you add the pieces of wide receiver. You feel like, hey, man, this is probably our most talented team yet under James Franklin. At LSU, you got and try and get the number one portal class in the country. You put together an $18 million roster. You got a quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier who you think's a first rounder. Same with Drew Aller, obviously. So I think a lot of similarities in terms of like, hey, we are invested, but that means it's playoff or bust. And I think in both cases you get to 3 losses, and it's like, okay, bust. But I also think like it kind of takes, obviously James Franklin was at Penn State a lot longer than Brian Kelly was at LSU, but I think it does sort of take a unique set of circumstances there in terms of how you lost, and also just like kind of how unpopular the coaches became, kind of in those, around there. Like I think that's the kind of a little bit of a tiebreaker there. Is that I think people were just pretty ready to see change and really not believing that coach was going to get it fixed.
I still can't. I can the Kelly one. Like you said, it was a shorter period of time. It wasn't always like it didn't always seem like a great fit and all of those things. But I still feel like we haven't talked about enough how Penn State and James Franklin were connected for 11 years, and they lose one game at Oregon or against Oregon, and then they go out to UCLA, lose, and it goes off the rails with a loss to Northwestern, and then it's over in that short period of time. Over a course of 15 days. Like, is there a lesson about how college football works now in there, or is that just a one-off to you of like totally the right circumstances, like you were just explaining, as a team that wanted to go to the playoff and they realized they weren't going to, and it happened that way?
I've said it before, but like I covered the Oregon Penn State game, and I walked out of that building being like, Penn State's still pretty good. Like when I saw them drop to 7th in the AP poll, I was like, that maybe seems a little low. I think they could still be top 5 team. They still went toe to toe with the Ducks and took them to overtime and rallied in that game and everything. And so I think part of it is just like just the sheer unpredictability of the sport, that you would never expect them to just totally lay down against UCLA and Northwestern in those next 2 weeks. Part of it is like, I think it's just I think Penn State folks, have watched the same thing for 12 years, and I think they're the right to like feel a little bit impatient, even though you just went to the playoff and just went far in the playoff. Like I think there's probably like a more of a kind of a ceiling frustration there, a little bit of just like, man, we want, you've heard Pat Kraft say we want to compete for national championships. I think over the last 2 years, there wasn't a lot of like belief in that fan base that James Franklin was actually going to lead them to a national championship. So I think when you kind of give a guy everything he's asking for finally, and then he can't, he kind of blows it and goes 3-3, then I think part of that is just like, this just confirmed our fears, and we got to make a change here now. But you're right. I mean, you actually look back on it in the moment, and Northwestern's not a bad team, and UCLA suddenly is not a bad team. It's like, man, it's almost like are these ADs like reading the message boards now and just being like, okay, yep, they're right, let's do it.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy how it sort of all came together that quickly. So let's stick on Penn State for a second, because we haven't talked about it in a couple weeks around here. The conversation has sort of fizzled out at least a little bit, but I don't know if it has even really started behind the scenes. Matt Rhule is always the name that keeps popping up for the Penn State job, given the connection to Pat Kraft, the AD there. Is there, like, have we advanced any further in that search at this point, or is Matt Rhule still the name that continues to stand sort of at least outside of most of the others at this point with that job?
I mean, I'm sure that there's more exploratory stuff going on. I'm sure if you're Pat Kraft, you're trying to find out if those guys that would be just like the dream home run guys would actually talk to you or not. Like, I'm guessing Marcus Freeman is not talking to anybody about these jobs, but he's going to get approached by about all of them. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to see that with a few of these. My hunch for now is that probably nothing has really changed on Pat Kraft's end in terms of, Matt Rhule being really the right guy for the job. But I think, we've still got 5 weeks to go here, something like that, before, these decisions are going to get settled. And I think as we've seen the last 2 weeks, like, you kind of forget a lot can swing in the roller coaster of these seasons anyways. So, I think if you think back to when Nebraska fired Scott Frost after 3 games, like, these things are kind of a journey, and you kind of have an idea of what it might be at the start. And it goes totally, Matt Rhule hadn't even been fired by the Panthers at the time that search started. So, I think that there's definitely room for more twists and turns in this, but as long as Nebraska has a successful season, I would imagine Matt Rhule is still going to be extremely high on that list.
How many SEC programs will attempt to hire Lane Kiffin, and will any of them succeed?
Have you ever looked at those Reddit threads of this thing called Overemployed, where people are just having 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, and they're just talking about how they're getting away with it?
Right. Yes, I have.
It's
I've
a post-COVID thing.
Yeah.
I think Lane Kiffin and John Summerall are each going to have 3 jobs next year.
Yeah.
I think that's just how it's going to go. And maybe we can pull that off. I don't think there's an NCAA rule prohibiting that necessarily. Yeah, I think those guys are, and that, I have no doubt John Summerall is going to get one of these jobs, whether it's Auburn or it's Kentucky or it's Ole Miss if Lane Kiffin leaves. Very, very safe bet that he's coaching the SEC next year. Man, if Lane doesn't move, if Lane's I imagine a few years ago, Lane would be I got to be at an LSU, I got to be at a Florida to have a chance to compete for championships. If Ole Miss has reached the point where Lane Kiffin's no, we can do it here. I'm happy here. I'm not going to mess with happy here. And, we can just go recruit players off those rosters and get even better over here. If Lane doesn't make a move, I think that's just going to make this stuff even wilder. And again, I'll point back to 2022. Nobody thought Lincoln Riley would leave Oklahoma. Nobody thought Brian Kelly would leave Notre Dame. So as much as we're kind of sitting here this week saying man, I just don't know if there's enough good candidates for these jobs. We're probably setting up for some moves that you're just kind of make your head explode a little bit. That's my guess right now is if some of these guys like Kiffin don't make moves, then somebody's going to take the bait and take a huge offer to make a move that maybe they shouldn't make, but it'll shock all of us.
If I had to guess right now, I actually kind of think Lane stays for the reasons that you just explained. I don't know why, but it sort of just feels that way to me, given that there's going to be, all these jobs that are, all these places that are probably going to be coming after him at the same time. And It feels like a very Lane move to be nah, you know what? I'm good. Something must be going pretty right here in order for that to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if the head coach of Ole Miss turning down LSU would be pretty wild, because obviously we still look at LSU as a top 5 job. And even though Brian Kelly, he won, but he also, didn't achieve the goal there of winning a championship. Obviously, the last 3 head coaches did win national championships there, so that would tell you a lot about the evolution of Ole Miss over the last 5 years. If Lane Kiffin is like, you know what, I went through this before. I left Tennessee. I regretted it. I don't want to make these mistakes again. That would be a really wild thing. But I'm with you, man. Like you can definitely talk yourself into it. That like for him and his family, they're kind of in the right place at the right time right now.
What sort of big? Because there's going to be a big swing from LSU. Like if there is a name that strikes you as big swing for LSU, is there anybody that jumps to mind first?
Well, I'll tell you, like back in 2022, they took about 8 big swings, and I think they even, as far as I recall at the time, I think they even did reach out to Matt Rhule just to gauge some interest, along with Lincoln Riley and Jimbo Fisher and everybody else in the world there. So we'll see if Scott Woodward is making the hire at LSU. Obviously, that's a pretty expensive buyout that he's got to take the blame on there. So we'll see how that goes. But no, I don't think LSU is like going to just go shopping off the list that everybody put out on Sunday. I think they're going to try to swing for the fences here. And I think you feel like you kind of have to, because certainly it takes somebody that you feel like can quickly get you back caught up with Georgia and Alabama and the superpowers in the conference.
Max Olson from ESPN is with us. I want to switch to some on the field stuff real quick. So this is a topic that it's just been sitting around in my head, and we get to this point in the season, and there's usually a lot up in the air right around this time, but the names in the top 10, like when those playoff rankings come out on Tuesday night, it's going to look a lot different. How many teams this year do you think have a chance to win a national championship compared to what it has been? It feels like that number has maybe exponentially grown in a very short period of time.
I'm with you on that. And I feel like at this point in the season, like you're right, we'll have the playoff rankings soon, and that will kind of start and set the conversation there a little bit. But I feel like we're past the midseason point here. And I don't think anybody feels like here's the team that is just obviously going to win the national championship, nor is there like, hey, here's the guy who's obviously going to win the Heisman this year. I think the Heisman race feels wide open. And I feel like the championship race, you could kind of go down the list and say, man, there's probably like 6 or 7 teams that feel like, hey, if we get the right spot in the bracket and we stay healthy and stuff, like we got a chance. And so, yeah, it feels different. I mean, obviously last year we weren't talking about Ohio State and Notre Dame is right, the obvious teams to get to the end of it. So, I think if you're like at Ohio State right now, if you're at Oregon right now, Alabama, you're feeling really, really good about what you've done so far. But gosh, I mean, the way A&M and Indiana and some of these other teams are playing, Georgia Tech, like just sort of the teams that have been pretty kind of like dominant and won the games they needed to win and looked good in some important games. I think we got a chance for a lot of teams to play spoiler here. And, in the past, you'd say, hey, just because of, recruiting rankings and stuff, none of those teams can win a national championship. And gosh, I think there's going to be a couple here that mess around and make the Final Four.
Have we thought about a world where Indiana in football wins the national championship? Like that's a real possibility in this world that we live in right now.
It is. I can't say it's not. I mean, other than like the Iowa game was close, but nothing else is. But they beat Oregon by 10, I believe, and then nobody else has come close to messing with these guys. So, I think last year people were sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop and like, okay, they're going to go when they play a good team, they'll get exposed and all that. We felt that going in when Nebraska went there, right? And then you just get completely blitzed by them. So, like, I think that team is just built on what they've done last year, and it's they're pretty far ahead of the rest of the Big Ten, and besides Ohio State and Oregon, and it's really not close right now. So wrap your head around it. There's a non-zero chance.
Not only did we jump ahead to that, we also jumped ahead to, well, Indiana's coach is like the most, he'd be the most sought after coach in the country. He's done incredible things wherever he's been, but especially at Indiana over the last couple of years. And he said, I'm not leaving Indiana to take any other job that opens. I'm staying at Indiana. once again, it's I got to wrap my head around all these things. It's a different time we're in.
Well, and that's not like an accident of timing either. Like,
yeah,
from what I've heard, certainly Florida, sort of reached out to Cignetti's camp to see if there'd be interest. I don't doubt that Penn State was trying to feel out if Cignetti would have interest. So, like, he knew. I'm sure he didn't expect LSU, but like he knew what some of these options that were going to be on the table, and he's a guy who I think feels pretty comfortable about finishing out his career in Bloomington and continuing to build on this thing. And for a guy that shows up there, and has to totally rebuild a roster at a basketball school and kind of fight for every penny there, it's just unbelievable what they've achieved in a year and a half in terms of just totally changing the momentum and perception there.
Max, we'll let you go on this because this is a conversation we're going to have after we take a break here. Why now? I shouldn't ask you that way because that's a very slanted question. But would Dan Lanning think about leaving Oregon? Is that a possibility?
No. And if you talk to people who work for him, people who know him really well, they say absolutely not. I think if Dan Lanning really wanted to be the head coach of Alabama a couple years ago, then he'd probably be the head coach of Alabama right now. I think if he really wanted to be the head coach of Texas A&M, he'd be the head coach of Texas A&M. Like, I think that they've got a pretty special situation up there in Eugene with the relationship to Nike and Phil Knight. And, I think that, I've visited that program and visited their players, and like, I think culturally they're pretty elite. They really are. And, obviously it didn't all come together last year with the first round loss and all that, but Dan Lanning is there to stay. I don't think that there's a job coming up here that he would waste a second thinking about.
All right, Max, we'll let you go. As always, great to talk to you. We'll do this more as things continue to be very interesting in the world of college football. Appreciate it.
Sounds great. Thanks, man.